Welcome back, everyone, to this last track session of the afternoon today. Uh, we have an interview set up for you. We're going to talk about end-to-end testing, which also happens to be the paddle that I belong to, the Pearl. And with me today is Remco Oostelaar. Remco, welcome.
Welcome, Sanne. Welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me to the TestJam 2021.
Yes, we're excited to
Amazing.
have you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a great level of enthusiasm there. So tell me, Remco, what exactly is your job?
My job. What's my job? Now, let me introduce myself. So my name is Remco Oostelaar, working already for 15 years with the Capgemini Group. And I was lucky to be 9 of those years in Capgemini Australia. So I worked in Sydney. Within Capgemini Netherlands, I'm leading the end-to-end capability, ensuring that we build up the capability in our organization around end-to-end testing. However, I'm also leading one of the accounts for a French container shipping company where I'm implementing the SAP and doing the testing.
That sounds exciting. So, with those 15 years experience and the night in Australia, at one point you woke up and you thought, end-to-end testing, that's my thing. How did that happen?
End-to-end testing is my thing. What I really like about end-to-end testing is not to just look at from a process flow point of view. We will talk about it later. But when you look at an organization, it's not one application that you come across. You will see there is a multiple applications. There's multiple frameworks. There's multiple people and departments and all the things. So it's a complex environment. And when you come into an organization, you want to help them to improve their quality of their products. You need to think about how you're going to organize the testing. And that's the reason why I love end-to-end, because it shows you, you start to think in global terms for an organization, and then you can see how you can improve that quality across those application stacks for the organization and then for the end user.
One of the things that I love about it, which I think we share, is that it also goes across organizations. We have large global companies, of course, that have complex end-to-end testing, but we are also more and more creating an interdependent IT landscape, which goes even across company borders.
I think well said. I think we use the word data and water, but if you look at an organization, there's most of the companies are global organizations. They deal with information from the US, they deal with information from Europe. And sometimes it's the smaller digits in those data that are going to cause the problems. Um, when I when you look at end-to-end, we often when you start testing, I know my first day of testing was to test a process flow. And that's a horizontal testing. You start to look at like a login page, you click it, you go to the next step, into the next step. That's the most basic testing that we often do. The second thing that you will come across is that then when you're becoming a little bit more mature in testing, you start to look at, hey, we have integrations. Hey, you start to look at how are we going to test those integrations well through APIs, or what is the type of integration that we have. When I started to do a global rollout, I had to deal with systems across systems, systems across across
Around the world.
regions, and you come across different types of problems, and that's interesting. At the end, it needs to come together in one single report going to the management.
Yeah, and obviously that's what keeps us interesting. In case you have questions for Remco or for me, actually, anything about end-to-end testing that you'd like to know, please pop these in the chat. But in the meantime, if you need a bit of inspiration to get started, let us know why you love end-to-end testing or why you're interested in it. So we'll continue from there.
Yeah.
So when we talk about end-to-end testing, that's very interesting. But I know there's another area within Capgemini that you're very active and passionate about. And those are our diversity, equity, and inclusivity actions.
Diversion and inclusion, and I think it's important. We live in a society where we have all kinds of people from different across the world coming together. We work in a diverse society. What we see often in IT, that diversity is not yet there, and is a very historical male organized structure.
Is this also from your experiences abroad? Because you did work in Sydney for such a long time. Did that influence that as well?
Sydney is very multicultural. So you will come across a lot more, yeah, people from different cultures and backgrounds. But if you look at software when we develop it, I think especially for a tester, it's important that they take their inclusiveness into the software. An example is that I can see now these days it's very close to home. If I log into a new website and they say, we want your profile, you need to log down your email address, they often still ask me, are you a man or a woman? The question is that still valid? Do we need to keep that information there? Or do we exclude people with that information? Um, but if I start thinking then from an end-to-end point of view, is if we're going to fill in different types of information, him, her, or maybe something else, what does it mean from the end-to-end flow into other systems? Are we able to process that information, or are we going to cause a bottleneck in the next integration point where they don't accept that word?
So everything for you does tie back into this end-to-end testing, that's obvious.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about some of the projects you've worked on, and especially the type of quality measures that you would generally talk about with your clients.
So one of the big learnings I took back from all the testing that I've done, you will come across a couple of types of clients. One client that knows exactly what he or she wants. That's easy because you can adapt to it. Then the next person says, you tell me what it needs to be. And that's a very difficult because I can't determine the software, the quality that you want for your product.
So what then do you do when they give you kind of like, well, you're the expert, you come and
You are
help
the
us?
expert. I think it's important then to really rapidly bring the people together to have a conversation about quality, have a conversation about the timeline, have a conversation about the cost around it. And you need to bring those different elements together to be able to determine for the client what is the right approach for you to bring this forward. What is the risks that you want to take also, and what is the risk also when it goes wrong for your clients. And it's important to know these factors, and that is different for each type of company.
So you would say you would start the discussion always about the quality, the time, and the money that it's available, and start there in terms of determining then which measures you would use?
Yes. If I would have all the money in the world, I would still be my first client and I would do still the first project. But I don't have that luxury. My task is within a given time frame often is to get that software from tested by through the process. So it's important also to understand what that means for us as a testing community, but also for my team, but also for the client on risks and how we can mitigate that. And you don't need to mitigate everything at day one. You can plan that accordingly in a wise way.
But that does mean, I think, that as soon as you start your assignments and you get these big complex systems, you immediately have to think about politics and culture. Now, has that ever helped you, or has it gone against you?
Um, so I don't know if it's politics, but every company is different. If you look, I worked in different types of companies, because we are in a consultancy company, so you get at different types of clients, and every client has a different culture and different appetite to risks. And I think that's important to take that into your decision making process. Now, if I look at a bank or a government has a different ways of dealing with risks. And one is more maybe top down, and the other maybe if you look at a startup, it's more bottom up. So understanding for who you're going to deliver the software is important to make the right decisions at the end.
So, in terms of when that's your interest as a tester, and you need to be able to look at it at all these different levels, top down, bottom up, and take these things into account, what kind of skill sets are we talking about? Suppose, for instance, we have someone watching that is right now doing test automation, but they want to branch into end to end testing. Where would they start?
Uh, probably you're already doing end to end. So even if you looked at all the stories that we heard today, there is all in every story. There's end-to-end. If you look at automation, you see the structure of end-to-end is often in a vertical position, where you go from component to module to a process, and you want to use that model in a vertical way to test as quickly as possible through a CI/CD pipeline. When you talk about maybe more manual testing in the traditional sense, is more a horizontal model. So testing is everywhere. What you can see in what is the main difference when you go into end-to-end in complex environments is that you need to understand the landscape. So you need to understand different architectural models. You need to understand the client. What is the client doing, and why is it important for the client? So you need to have domain knowledge. Now, I see also that it's important that you look at, if you have platforms like Salesforce, SAP, the Microsoft Dynamics, to start to learn those platforms. Because a lot of the things, how that platform is working, will tell you also where the risks are and how you should be doing your testing in the most efficient way.
So what you're saying is, if you're starting out, then take a look at your client domain. That's something you can start out with. Really understand what kind of company you are working for. And then the next step would be to look into the architecture, the architecture of the whole company. We're not talking test architecture here.
No, look at the systems under test that you have. It doesn't matter to look at the whole company, but look at the systems that you have under test. How are they working? How are they communicating with each other? And that tells you a lot about how you're going to structure your testing. Just be aware, don't try to fit everything in one model. We talk often about different models in testing and frameworks, and you need to bring them together. It's not one single model that you can apply to every tool and every solution and every application.
Because in terms of that kind of thing, like tooling or modeling or visualizing these complex systems, are there any favorites that you use?
In tooling about to create that vision?
For instance, are there any
Not
go-tos?
really. I think it's you need to have a journey picture with a client. You can come into a client and do a specific task. And that task can be, you need to test an application and then you finish it. And that can be okay. In some of the cases, you need to think beyond. You need to think about how you create a new vision for the client about where we are going to, especially if you're sitting longer on an engagement. That
Can you
engagement
give me a concrete example? Because I don't know if you can talk about your current client, but maybe if one of the past ones.
No, I will not talk about my current client because we're still happening, and I think it's we're still in the process. But one of my previous clients was a construction company in Australia. We were on a point that we were doing a program of work. We were delivering the solution. There was a global delivery of finance platform. But what we noticed is that we had a lot of repetitive tasks. How can we automate? So we started to go back, and we had a conversation with the client and said, look, we believe we can do it different. We think we should be, you have an all application landscape, you have different applications, but we want to have one single view, because when you go into production, when you deliver it, it's not one application deliver, you deliver the set. So you need one single view. How can we create that? And that's what we started with. That means that we needed different tooling. We changed our automation approach. So number of things that come in place were building up to that end vision that we had. Now that end vision was accomplished. We were able to visualize to the client the quality across multiple domains and testing phases.
So what kind of actions in terms of visualizing that for your client? What did that look like?
At the end, it was a single dashboard. And
A dashboard. Okay.
And we had a vision of, we want the dashboard on the floor, so that every project manager could see what is happening within this project. Now, that didn't happen. But we were able to show exactly the flows, the value chains, the quality that was there. and sitting within that space, how much testing was done, what was the level of automation, etc., how we were accelerating.
So in general, when you enter these projects, how does your role get positioned? Because I know we're having a lot of discussion about quality coaching, agile leads, quality leads. Where does the end-to-end tester that is approaching these complex systems, where does he fit in?
The majority of the companies are not that far yet. And we talk about agile concepts, about the quality engineering and these things. It's still that testing is still often we see that still an isolated process. We try to move and we're getting that opportunity, but you can still see that I believe there is a lot more space that we can take.
And when there's more space, are you talking about things like shifting left?
No, shift left is not something new. So shifting left was already there in all development phases, and you can see that back. I think what shift left enabled us now when it's accelerating is because of the new tools that we have that were presented today and the new ways of working. That enabled the shift left. I'm very excited about shift right because that's a very newer area where you can use information from your production
Yeah,
into your test approach.
I've been in testing long enough to know where testing in production used to be almost a curse word, but that has definitely changed, and I think that's for the better.
Yeah, and that means also that we are testers getting a different role. If you look at Capgemini, we do deliver managed services for application stack. So that's delivering support for applications. Now, if you can get now more information from the users, how can you use that in your process? I was a couple of years ago with a different client, and what they had done, they optimized it so much that they were able to predict issues happening in production and able to point the issues also to the developer. And they were able to put the teams in power of the production issues. So you can see then something happened in production, or it was not happening yet, but they noticed something. The message was directly queued into their Jira board. They got the message saying, hey, this is an issue that is going to happen. Can you look at it? They were able to action it and bring it into production. And yeah, so they were getting their yearly bonus based on the performance of their code in production. And I thought it was very interesting.
I can see your eyes starting to light up with this because I think that's what excites us the most when quality measures like that are implemented and we see that for the client, things actually really improve to the point where you said bonuses are attached to that system's performance.
Yeah, so your whole organization is turned into a model where quality is on the forefront. And where you can predict something in production to happen and you can already action that with your team. I think that is my ideal situation. You know, that would be the best case that I can give to my customers.
That does sound awesome. We do have a question from the chat. Jacopo asks, and I'm sure you'll be able to do this. How would you explain to a child what end-to-end testing is? Now, I know you do have children, so how do you tell them what you do?
Yeah, I think that every person in IT is not able to explain what he does on his work to his kids. For me, end-to-end, what I explained, you have the vertical. If you look at the example that we showed earlier about logging into a web page, then you go. So that's a flow. That's a flow diagram that you can then can test. When you test it across multiple organizations, you can then talk about a procurement process that sits in SAP, or you can talk about a Salesforce process. Or you can talk about a process where you want to do a payment to the bank. That's the bank processing payments. Now, these are all, I would say, horizontal processes. Now, the vertical processes is similar, but then you look at the login screen and you go from component level to the login screen, and that's what you test. So it's how you want to break it down, of what you want to present to our client is how you can describe end to end.
Yeah, the way I like to explain it to my kids is I like to use examples which they already know. So we're really into online grocery shopping, for instance. So I really like to show them on YouTube how the different foodstuffs are made and then moved into warehouses. So then I also show them, of course, the app where we order our groceries. And then I actually tell them this is what mommy does. You know, she links these systems and she makes sure they keep working well. That's kind of how I tell her what
That's a
it is.
really great example. I will use it tonight. That's thank you, Sanne.
Your kids will finally understand what you do every day.
Just I think they will look at Minecraft tonight.
Well, Minecraft is also all about building and breaking down, so there's a lot of
Exactly, that's true.
analogies there as well. All right. Um, in general, when you look at our end-to-end paddle, the people in it, when we talk about education and learning, like what kind of things would you like to see us do more of that we maybe don't do enough right now?
So I think in general, what I see happening in IT for the last couple of years is really just focus on technology. And I think technology is important. You need to know it. But what's also important is domain knowledge. And what I mean with domain knowledge, if you are in the finance sector, it's handy to understand finance. Otherwise, you in the numbers, how to deal with the numbers. Otherwise, you will fall through the cracks really quickly. Um, that's the same in supply chain. It's the same in understanding, warehousing and other things. So understanding the process within an organization. I think is a very is not enough highlighted, and
So
you need
would
that.
you then also recommend that if you are moving into these domains that you stick with these domains for a couple of years?
Oh yeah, so if you look at exploratory testing, we talk about manual testing is a little bit more out here if you follow the process flow, but we need to use the new terms. You need to understand the organization. You need to talk to be able to have a level of conversation with your stakeholders in the business to define already in an early stage if the user story is right. Does it have the right requirements or are we missing something? And you can only have those discussions when you understand the organization. And I
I'm
will take it now close to myself. I'm in a shipping company. I didn't know that how large container ships, how they were traveling around the world, how they have their own tax model around those ships, how the investment processor is working for a large container ship.
your recommendation is making me feel a little bit seen as well because in terms of domain knowledge, I think I'm also in an assignment where it's retail, which is new to me, and I don't think I've invested maybe the time that I should have into getting to know the domain. I've been focused so much on doing the testing and getting those quality measures in that maybe I haven't focused on learning what kind of domain I'm in.
Yeah, uh, food is an interesting one. Huh? You can even see the differences between the different companies that we have in the Netherlands around this topic. I think if you go to Jumbo, is a family company, has a different. We talked about culture, is a different culture than probably Albert Heijn or Ahold. Huh? Is a large organization, different culture, different ways of dealing with risk, and able to process their activities and deliver testing. So yeah, I think it's important to understand which organization you're working for.
Now, one of the things I also want to talk with you about today is stakeholder management, because I know that's something I struggle with within my projects. When we get a lot of suppliers in, we get a lot of people, software as a service, of course, is much more common these days. So we enter a landscape that has many more stakeholders, which are all clamoring for the same amount of attention. So in terms of stakeholder management, like, do you have any tips or recommendations?
So stakeholder management is a difficult topic, and it doesn't matter for in which organization you sit. There's so many people that wants to be involved or need to be involved in your project, that sometimes you lose control. If you go back to the start of your project, where you define together with your stakeholders, what are we going to do? Who are the stakeholders?
But
That's where you need to start.
that's my point. I'd love to have those discussions, but sometimes even getting those people to the table is quite a struggle. Like to motivate them to come and take part of that conversation is still a daily thing that is like, well, this is your product. In the end, it's your process. You're all involved, but then still there's a little bit of reluctance to take ownership of their own parts.
Yeah, and it's when we started here with the conversation, what is a difficult client is when they tell you, you determine the quality for us. Tell us what you think, what we should be doing, because it's not in our ability to define for an organization what we should be doing from a testing point of view.
That does make sense because when stakeholders are very involved and already have a definition of quality, it's quite easy for me because then I can just work on complying to those standards. It does help when they're undefined, I think is a lot of the where the reluctance also to participate comes in.
Yeah, if you talk about top-down structures, I prefer top-down sometimes because it's very easy sometimes for me as a person to listen to the boss and say, you tell me what you want to do, and it's top-down. It's more difficult when you have bottom-up organizations because that means that you're leading that quality discussion, and you need to determine with the people around you what that quality is going to look like. So depending on what type of organization, yeah, you need to find the technique that you bring the people together. Yeah.
So I think the facilitation is a big part of that as well, of course. Um, we talked about those kind of special focus learning areas for end-to-end testers. We mentioned domain, we mentioned architecture. Is there anything that we haven't mentioned yet that you think we should?
So if you look, for me, I think it's engagement management, project management is really important because it has a lot of similarities. We talked about stakeholders, we talk about you need to bring a complex environment visible into actions and tasks, and you need to be able to monitoring that. There's often you deal with large portfolio of money because you have a lot of people that working in your organization. So engagement management is really important, and I think it's also for a lot of testers that are good in that part. You see them growing into the engagement management part, and I think that's a good learning path. You start as a tester, you grow up, you get the test management, test program management, the architecture, and then you will grow out of into an engagement manager. And I think that's a beautiful learning path, and people often miss it.
Maybe for the audience now, like engagement management, what types of activities does that involve?
It's about organizing the people, the processes within in your organization to succeed an end goal that you want to have at a certain time. For me, is a success of a project is when I am able to deliver on time against the expected quality. And I think this is the word, expected quality, because for me, if the clients expects that we still have defects in production of our defects and that we take them into production, I'm fine with it. Because the customer is aware of what we agreed together. And we can work around that, and I will do everything in my power to ensure that it's in the best possible position. But if something is there, I can bring it up and make that transparent and say, okay, this is the plan that I would recommend going forward.
All right. If there's any more questions from the audience, we have about 5 more minutes left, and we'd love to see them pop up here. In the meantime, I'll just continue asking my own because that's carte blanche to me. That was perfect. So one of the things that I've always struggled with, well, occasionally struggled with, is politics. So I'm going to sketch a scenario where it was a little bit tricky. So in terms of end-to-end testing, there were two companies that had to work together. It was kind of a governmental mandate to do so, but there were conflicting interests on both sides. So in the end, the decision was made to get someone from outside as an independent end-to-end test manager to coordinate all the quality activities.
Yeah.
Would you say that was a good solution?
You know, if you can look at the Dutch politics, sometimes it's important to bring someone onto the table that is an outsider to bring people that are fighting together. But you know, when you start a project, there must be agreements between the different parties. So it's important that you understand also from a test manager, what are those agreements. You don't need them in detail, but if you have a vendor and another vendor that need to supply you, but in the contract there is no agreements about how the defects are going to be managed, then that's an activity that you should be bringing up to your stakeholders, because you will know one day when you find a defect, you will have an issue that you can't get the right people to solve your defects. And this is also on performance and all the requirements you come across. If
you need those agreements in place.
You need to have agreements.
And if you don't have them yet, that's your first thing to do.
You need to talk to your stakeholder to see that he is going to support you on that process, and or that in that he puts it in place.
Well, defect management was pretty tough in that scenario, so that makes sense with what you're saying. It's time for final remarks. Any last comment you want to share with our audience?
No, not for me. I think for me, end-to-end is a lively environment. You probably can see there's a lot of things happening in that space, and I think we end-to-end testing will happen, will continue, and I think it will become more and more important with the connection, the way that we are now connecting and disconnecting our systems. Systems are getting more specialized for certain topics, and we need to bring that together.
Yeah, the specialization is coming hand in hand with interdependency.
Yeah. The second thing is that I think for us as testers, it's important that we keep in mind how we look at software from a diversity and inclusion point of view.
Right.
I think we have seen great examples around AI where there was a bias on the AI models. We can see that if you look at websites, they're not always inclusive. We can see that the struggles that are happening within organizations now to transform into that diversity and inclusion, and how that impacts their systems. Because there was a global government who did a survey on its people, and he said you can do 3 options, men, women, or other, and then however other was not recognized because they didn't have a field for other. So.
Yeah. It's still embarrassing that happens.
Yes, It's very embarrassing. So let us take our look at ourselves, how we are looking at software, and think also from a position of other people around you, how we can make software better. If you look at people with a handicap, if you look at people that have a different background, how can we make software together better?
Take them along as stakeholders as well.
Yeah. Just take them along as stakeholders and ensure that we do the right things.
Sounds good. Remco, thank you very, very much.